Okay, I think we've got some participants joining. Give us just one more minute and we'll get started in just a moment. Everybody that's joining, thank you so much. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Hello, everyone. We're just getting ready to start in about 60 seconds. Bear with us another minute and we'll be ready to roll. Thank you again for everybody that's joining. Give us just another minute and we will be ready to start. Okay. Looks like we've got a few more people joining. We're going to hang back just another minute so that a few more people can get on. Thank you everybody for joining. We're going to get started in just a second. We're just waiting for that Facebook Live to go. Almost there. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started for everybody. Please feel free in the chat line or in the Q&As to post if you have any trouble hearing me or any of our panelists. I think we're going to get rolling as a few more people join. My name, unlike the screen you're looking at, is Brandy Smith. I'm the Communications and Development Director for Utah Clean Energy. Thank you so much for everybody for joining today. I'm thrilled that we've got so many attendees live. It never fails to astound me how many energy nerds there are in this state. So thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know us, Utah Clean Energy is a local nonprofit organization who works to turn the tide on climate change by focusing on our energy use. So we ultimately want to help all Utahns make the transition to clean, non-polluting energy by making things like wind and solar and geothermal more affordable and more accessible across our state. Today's webinar is a crash course in solar and storage. Very much Utah Clean Energy's way. We have crammed a lot of information into this webinar, but we're hoping to just give you a taste of what solar and storage can mean for Utah and then provide you with some follow-up information. I'm gonna share my screen really quickly. Bear with me, there we go. Everybody can see that, hopefully. Okay. Oh dear. There we go. So for today's call, we have Kate Bowman, Utah Clean Energy Solar Project Coordinator. She is going to be giving you kind of the 411 of what we mean by resiliency and what solar and storage can mean for Utah. Then we have Roland Howard here with Hunt Electric. He's going to be looking at and showing you some really exciting projects here in Utah for businesses and kind of larger groups. Last but not least, we have Tom Mills with Creative Energies, who has a ton of information on how we can use solar and storage in our homes, which is great. Before I turn things over to them, though, I have just a little bit of housekeeping. First, we are looking, let me just transfer here. We're looking forward to your questions for the Q&A. Please post throughout, and I'll be gathering those questions. We are going to hold questions officially until the end of the webinar. We'll circle back with all of our speakers with your questions. But if for any, and for those, if you're on Facebook Live, feel free to post questions in those comments, and again, we'll get them to our speakers. If for some reason we're unable, oh dear. Sorry, team, technical issues. I don't know if you can still see that screen. If for some reason we're unable to get to your questions, please reach out to all of our experts here. I'll come back to the slide as well for their contact information. If you have any other questions on solar and storage, their information is here. Last but certainly not least, a little disclaimer. This webinar is for informational purposes only. It is in no way an endorsement of one company or another, or one technology or another. We are very proud and happy to work with Creative Energies and Hunt Electric, but there are a variety of solar installers in the state. We encourage you to look into all of them. There's a great resource called the hub.utahcleanenergy.org. that has a complete solar installer list that you can look through of people that do commercial, that do residential and storage. So we encourage you to look at that resource. So with no more delays, let's kick things off. I'm gonna hand things over to Kate Bowman, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Brandy. Hi, my name is Kate, and I'm going to start this webinar with a brief discussion of what we really mean when we talk about resilience. And solar and storage is capable of providing so many different benefits and services that it can seem really complicated. And so I hope that this context helps to sort of, frame some of the capabilities of solar and storage, and is a useful intro to the much more detailed information that Roland and Tom are going to provide about some specific examples and case studies. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everyone is able now to see my slides. And so to start, I'd like to talk about what we really mean when we talk about resilience. And I like this definition, which comes from a presidential policy directive. So this informs federal agencies who are exploring resilience and asking these same questions. And the definition says, the term resilience means the ability to prepare for and adapt to changing conditions, and to withstand and recover rapidly from disruptions. So I like this definition because it focuses not just on avoiding the worst case scenario, but on actively preparing for disruption in advance in order to recover as quickly as possible and to facilitate a return to normal as quickly as possible as well. So why resilience? Well, this might seem somewhat obvious with a recent earthquake, especially if you were one of the people who lost power after the recent 5.7 magnitude earthquake in March. And there were 73,000 people who lost power after that quake, but we know that a larger earthquake would be much more serious, and electricity restoration times could be much, much longer. There's a scenario estimate for a magnitude 7 earthquake here on the Wasatch Front. And that scenario forecasts that nearly 450,000 households could lose electricity, and it could take weeks to even months to potentially restore electricity to everybody. So clearly anything we can do to improve our ability to withstand those disruptions or to recover from them more quickly, both as individuals and as a grid, can yield huge benefits. And here in Utah, we're also vulnerable to wildfires, and a hotter, drier climate means more frequent and larger fires. The Western wildfire season is now 105 days longer than the 1970s. That's more than 3 months of extra fire risk. And the utility infrastructure that we rely on to deliver power from power plants across hundreds of miles to our urban centers is vulnerable to disruption from wildfires. And we've all seen the images of devastating wildfires in California in recent years, some of which have been sparked by utility power lines. And so utilities are doing a lot to try and prevent future fires and to adapt to a world where more severe fire risk is really the norm. So California utilities are now proactively shutting off power lines during hot, dry, windy conditions when fire risk is high to actually avoid sparking fires in the first place. And last October, there were more than 1.5 million people in Northern California who lost power during these proactive utility shutoffs. And utilities in California are planning for more events like this in the future. So in the face of disruptive events, solar and storage is one tool to improve resilience. And Utah Clean Energy's published a report that explores the potential for solar and storage to contribute to emergency preparedness needs. And it outlines our findings and some challenges that we've identified for the future. And in particular, we found that the versatility and the scalability of solar combined with storage and the ability to combine solar and storage with other more traditional sources of backup power like generators is a huge opportunity to improve resiliency for critical facilities like hospitals or communication centers, radio stations, or community emergency shelters. And a major challenge of battery storage is the upfront cost, but fortunately the costs of battery storage have fallen really quickly, which creates new opportunities to use batteries as a tool to improve resiliency in all sorts of different applications. So a battery pack that cost more than $1,000 in 2010 would cost less than $200 today, and it could cost less than $100 within 5 years as those prices continue to go down. And so when you're thinking about resilience and emergency backup power needs, the capability that you'll need from a battery is going to be really different if you're looking to power your home versus your business versus a government building or another more community-focused application. So it really depends on your emergency backup goals. And most of the time, you're not expecting to need backup power. So when the grid is functioning normally, you might want to find other ways to use your battery storage, either to soak up some additional energy from your solar array to make sure you can use more of that energy, or to save money on your utility bills. But you can use solar, or rather you can use solar paired with storage for all of these three functions, but you can't necessarily use it for all of these three functions at the same time. So for example, if you're using the power from your battery on a daily basis to save money on your energy bills and you're draining that battery, it might not be fully charged and ready to go the instant the power goes out. So if that backup power is really critical to you, you're going to configure your system differently than if you're trying to save money, as much money as possible, or just make use of your solar. So those are trade-offs you have to consider. And I think we have some really helpful real-world examples where some of those trade-offs come into more, will be kind of presented with more detail. And I have a few case studies to illustrate the different services that battery storage can provide. And I picked these just to show the huge scale of services that solar and storage can provide, and how it can be configured different ways to add value even when it's not being used for emergency backup power. So I'll start with these solar-powered adaptive containers for everyone. This is essentially a shipping container, and it's equipped with solar panels and with batteries. And the city of Houston purchased 17 of these, and they can be dispatched as needed in the event of an emergency to provide mobile power in different locations. And then on a day-to-day basis, they can also be used to provide spare office space for city departments. They can be deployed to support special events, and they can be used for education purposes. And just for comparison purposes, one of these containers has about the same amount of solar that you would put on a small home. And so as another slightly bigger example, Florida's SunSmart program equipped more than 100 public schools with solar and storage systems. And these can be used to power lighting and electrical outlets if the grid's disrupted by a storm, to keep the lights on in the building. And each school is intended to provide emergency shelter for 100 to 500 people. But during normal operations, the schools can use the solar panels and the batteries to offset their daily electricity usage and save about $1,500 on their bills each year. And as a final example of a larger scale application, this is the Stafford Hill Solar Farm built on a closed city landfill in Rutland, Vermont. And Vermont's utility built this project after they experienced severe power disruptions during Hurricane Irene in 2011. And since then, the utility has actively been looking for opportunities to build an electricity grid that's going to be more resilient in the face of future disasters. And the Stafford Hill Solar Farm includes nearly 8,000 solar panels, which is enough to power about 2,000 homes. And in the event of a power outage, the solar farm can supply resilient power to the local high school, which has been designated as an emergency shelter. But on a day-to-day basis, the solar farm can generate power for the grid, and it can actually sell power into wholesale energy markets. And because it has storage, it can sell power not just when the solar is generating, but during the times when it's actually the most valuable to the grid. So as one example, on August 12th in 2016, it was hot out and power costs were high, and the solar farm was able to save the utility $200,000 in just 1 hour by discharging that power to the grid. And so it was able to deliver some cost savings by sending power out to the grid as well. So these case studies show there's a variety of use cases for battery storage, and there's a variety of ways that it can contribute to improving your own resiliency as an individual or the resiliency of our communities. And it's important to start by defining your needs and what you're hoping and expecting to achieve from battery storage. And so with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I'd like to turn things over to Roland and Tom, who are going to provide some more specific real-world examples of projects that showcase battery storage. And so I think first I'm going to turn things over to Roland with Hunt Electric.
Perfect. I appreciate it. Thanks, Kate. So my name is Roland Howard. I run the Renewable Energy Division at Hunt Electric. Our corporate office is based here in Salt Lake City. We're grateful that we got asked to participate in this, and we'll start off with just a quick overview of Hunt Electric. We have 3 office locations. We cover 8 states as a fully licensed electrical contractor. Our footprint's pretty vast. We focus very heavily on commercial and industrial utilities, solar, energy storage, energy management, geothermal, basically anything in the renewable energy realm is really where we focus in our group here. We have 8 in-house divisions. We cover the full realm of electrical. We have teams that can do transmission lines and substations, distribution, all the way down to audio video in your house, fiber optics. If it has electricity in it, we have experts in the field. So when we get back in on this, we have our renewable energy division I talked about briefly here. You can sort of see some of our key mark projects that we've done here recently for some couple different clients. We also do EV charging, both residential and commercial. We rolling a big program out with the state in conjunction with them right now. That's a pretty cool program on the renewable side there to help. So when we look at energy storage, we really see 3 key functions, and Kate hit on this also, but we look at it from an islanded mode, where you can take and isolate your house or your building in the commercial sense completely from the utility, disconnect, and the building doesn't know any different. If you're inside, everything still functions electrically as it should, everything's normal, everything's operational, and it doesn't care where the power is coming from. You have a completely islanded, multiple distributed energy resources, so whether it be some sort of solar or wind or heat pumps, and then some sort of energy storage coupled with it. There's lots of variance there, but the island mode essentially just operates completely isolated from any utility connection. The next one would be grid connected. This is where you would utilize the battery in conjunction with the grid. So the battery would not only charge and discharge while connected to the grid, but you'd have the functionality of doing any type of demand shifting or time of day offsets. And the third one is a backup mode. And this is really like using a commercial battery for the sense I'm speaking of here in your building as a giant uninterruptible power supply, or an UPS. So everybody's got a battery, or a lot of people have a battery pack attached to their desktop computer. So if the power goes out, the computer stays operational, but it's a very limited time. And so that's really what we look at with the backup mode is, do you have a critical load or something in your house or your building that requires this time window, generally a reduced time window than just fully functional, that requires that constant power grid in the event of an outage from the utility. When we look at resiliency, specifically with energy storage, we really focus on that we want a regular, reliable supply of energy. So we don't want any outside disruptions, i.e. an earthquake, or any type of utility outages caused by physical damage or environmental conditions causing the loss of power, the loss of energy to your facility. Some of the biggest users and people who could benefit the most are data centers with high energy usage, healthcare centers who always have to have some sort of energy source at any given point in time, and then other types of mission critical facilities. You know, anybody out there that has some sort of operation that has a significant cost or some sort of loss of life or loss of perishable goods can generally benefit very well from a energy storage system. In the first case study, this is actually our own building here in Salt Lake City. We did this about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. We actually have a fully operational microgrid. We have 4 sets of energy resources that we can pull from. Everything's fully automated. It operates behind the scenes, so you really don't ever see it. There's no switching. There's no tinkering with it. It just fully functions in the background. We pull power from the utility, the local electric utility here. We also have an array on the top of our roof, provide 100% of load offset for the facility. We have a 150 kW natural gas genset. So a genset generator sits outside our facility. And then we also have a lithium ion battery coupled with the system also. Some of the biggest things to keep in mind when we designed this and went through the process of bringing it in was we really were looking for a battery that has every function possible for resiliency, or not just resiliency, but every function out there. You know, we looked at it from a demand reduction perspective. You know, how do we take our demand charges in the afternoon and get rid of them or reduce the cost of them? In conjunction with that, sort of hand in hand, is time of use. You know, how do we maximize our solar production in the day and store it early in the morning, utilize it in the afternoon, or keep a hold of it for evening times. Along with that, like I mentioned, was renewable self-consumption. You know, how do we export the least amount with the way net metering rates work? We want to export as little as possible off of our grid and keep as much as possible to ourselves at 100% rate. Then the other thing that we've really hidden on this presentation is resiliency. You know, how do we ensure this facility is fully operational at any given point in time? You know, demand response is one I touched on to begin with, and then islanding, the formation of our own grid, essentially. So the way it really works is it's got a controller, or an energy controller, and it's really the heart of the system. So it looks like this. If you come into our office, there's a great big display, and it sort of shows you, and all these change, all the loads and numbers change real time with what the building's doing. You can see that in the orange bubble on the left. It sort of shows you exactly what your building's doing. And then the blue is what we're taking from the utility, and then the greens are our on-site generation sources. So each one will show exactly what each individual resource is doing, whether it's dispatching energy or whether it's utilizing energy. However it's functioning, it shows us real time what's going on. The occupants in the building at any given point in time have no idea where their energy is coming from. All they know is their computers are on, their lights are on, and the building's still heated and cooled. Some lessons learned we took out of this, being one of the first large commercial scale microgrids in the state to our awareness on a commercial level, is quality load data. It was a new building for us, and so we were really planning around, we didn't know what we were doing with part of the building when we acquired it. And so we really didn't have a good history of data. And so we had to make a lot of assumptions, and it really skewed things as we filled the building quickly. And so we've had to adapt our microgrid and our energy storage usage to adapt to the new processes that we've implemented in the facility. Commissioning time to get it just right. We're still always tinkering with it, but again, it's a test bed for us. What's really nice is for a customer facing one, you know, we can sit down and establish exact parameters of what you guys want and how it functions. And once we're commissioned, you set it and forget it. It operates the way that we originally established. Planning, space was a big one. Space is always an issue. Anything electrical, nobody ever leaves enough space for electrical gear. Batteries do take up space. They take up a significant amount of space with a commercial facility where you require a lot of energy storage. And then trusted partners. That was a big one for us. We didn't want to be in a relationship with a battery provider who had only been new in the market, or a battery provider who didn't have a long established history in the market. And selecting those key individuals was prime. The second one, this is more of a larger, setup, almost a utility scale. It's down in Penguich, Utah. We built some batteries for a contractor. Ultimately, Rocky Mountain Power is the owner. It's basically two 40-foot connexes or shipping containers full of batteries. It's about 5 megawatt hours, 1 megawatt hour of dispatchability. 684 lithium-ion batteries between the two containers. And everything's self-contained inside them. Fire suppression, HVAC, operations, the controllers, how it functions. Everything's tied into these two units, a very compact and neat footprint. There was really two objectives in the design and installation of that one. It was resiliency. There's really one line going down into that area of Utah. And they had a lot of issues with keeping power on all the time, or during peak times of the day, keeping power frequency and voltage up where it was so that brownouts wouldn't happen. And really they wanted to help just buffer that up. And that's really where the resiliency piece came in, is they put these batteries in conjunction with some solar, and that allows them to dispatch energy off of the batteries in the times when the demand goes high. As they dispatch it, it keeps the brownouts from happening. It keeps the resiliency piece for those people down there. It doesn't overload the power lines that are feeding the area. And it really just sort of complemented the existing system that it was installed a long time ago, and now just needed either updating or something to complement and keep it moving for the growth. The other thing was demand response. It goes hand in hand. High demand periods. How do we offset a big demand in the afternoons or certain select times of day? And this was a practical application. Some big lessons learned. Planning time was a huge one. The project took 1.5 years to plan and get all the materials in place. And we installed it and turned it on in under 14 days on site. So it's kind of a big skew for what goes into it. I guess the key to take out of this was planning makes everything work fantastic. And then using trusted partners again, that was another key one. Using industry-proven partners on the project really made it a seamless and effortless integration. That's all I have for now. I'll turn the time over to Tom and let him share with you guys on the residential.
Thank you, Roland. Let me pull up my screen. Can you guys see that okay? All right, great. Well, everyone, thanks for attending. And my name is Tom Mills with Creative Energies. I am our policy advocate there at the company. And we have been in the solar business since 2000. We started in Wyoming and did a lot of off-grid designs and projects in the state of Wyoming, and eventually made our way to Utah. We opened an office here in 2010, and we also operate in Idaho. So we operate in 3 states. As you can see here, we're getting ready to celebrate our 20 years of history. So again, we have a lot of experience behind us. Down here, you can see we're a member of Amicus. That's basically a large nationwide co-op group of mom and pop solar companies like ourselves. And I'd like to point out over here that we are a certified B Corp. Any of you who might not be familiar with that, basically it was something that was started to show that a business is not only trying to make a profit, but also trying to serve and give back to their community. And a lot of what we do, we offset our energy just like Hunt does with full solar on the roof, and we have a very extensive recycling program. We minimize waste, etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the battery storage on more of the smaller scale residential side of things. And I'm going to focus specifically on a lot of you may have heard about the Tesla Powerwall 2. And we do like this battery, like Hunt. You know, they want to make sure they're partnering with a company that has a good reputation, longevity, and Tesla is definitely on the cutting edge for residential backup. And some of the just obvious things that I'd like to point out with the lithium ion is space. This requires very little space. It's a very sleek design. It has a high number of cycles, but Tesla does not. A lot of companies will warranty their battery based on cycles, and Tesla does not do that. They're in it for a full 10 years as long as it's properly installed by a certified Tesla installer, which we are. So how does this work? First thing I want to do is talk about solar and battery tied to the grid without a power outage. So you can just get a feel for how it's working on a normal day. You can see here we're talking early morning, and the solar on your roof is really just waking up due to the low angle of the sun. But you do have people waking up in the household, right? And they're firing up their coffee pots. Somebody might be drying their hair, running a toaster, a blender. So the solar can't quite keep up with the demand of the house yet. So you can see the solar here in yellow is supplying about 1/3, and the grid is supplying about 2/3 of what the house needs first thing in the morning. Then as the day goes on, a lot of people, at least on a normal circumstances, are heading off to work and or heading off to school. I know that's a little different right now. But what this represents is that the house is not using as much energy now, but the solar is really starting to ramp up. And a matter of fact, the solar is supplying a lot more energy than the house can use. Well, now when a battery is added to that equation, that solar is not only running the house, but it can send all of its surplus energy to the battery first. So if the battery was used the night before and it's low, it's now getting topped off during the day and being prepared for the upcoming evening. If there's any leftover energy that's going to the battery, once the battery is topped off, it would bounce back up and go back out to the grid. Now that evening is approaching, the solar is dialing down in its production. Granted, once it's dark out, it's not doing anything. And the house loads are increasing now, though, because everybody's home from school, they're home from work, they're gathered around the dinner table. The house is using more energy. You can use your backup battery on a daily function to help offset the energy that you would normally be pulling from the grid. And Kate alluded to this as far as, sometimes you have to be selective about what function you want your battery to use. And just to let you know, there's a lot of friendly settings that can be done with a Powerwall. So if you wanted to play it safe and say, all right, I only want to pull 50% of that battery capacity for night use and always make sure I leave 50% in the tank for backup battery, you can do so. This is a typical overlay of what residential consumption looks like, represented here in the gray bars. In other words, this is your monthly electric bill. And then the yellow represents a bell curve of the energy being produced by the solar. This area down here in orange, before a battery is included in the equation, this represents the solar export going back out onto the grid. And for anybody who's watching this right now who has some sort of net metering agreement, this is where you're either getting a 1-for-1 exchange or the current 9.2 cents. So this, one of the functions a Powerwall can do is it can help you make your house more self-powered. So if you recall, we looked at that solar production curve represented here without a battery. Now that you've introduced a battery, you can say, hey, I'm going to use that battery during the evening to help offset any energy being pulled from the grid. And if the battery runs out, it'll start pulling from the grid. If it's a light load evening and you're not using that much energy and you still have some left over, the battery can take over and help offset that morning usage. So now I want to talk about, what we think is the real primary benefit of a battery when it's included with solar. And that's what it can do for you during a power outage. There are, a lot of people might not think about it, but there are a lot of hard fixed costs that come with a power outage. If your power is out and you can't stay in the home, you're going to have to spend some money to take yourself and the family to a hotel. You can see any prolonged outage, you're going to lose the food in your refrigerator, and that can be expensive to replace for a typical family of 5. And here's one a lot of people don't think about, especially if you have a basement and a sump pump. If there's a power outage during a heavy rain cycle and your pump isn't working, you can endure a lot of costs to the home and home repair in the basement. Here's what I think is probably very, very important for anybody who has anybody at home with some sort of medical device that might be dependent on a medical device that is plugged in. You want to make sure that this is being backed up, and your battery backup can do that. So, what size loads can it power? Basically, I think a simplified way to look at this is, and if any of you have ever opened up your branch panel, you'll see a range of circuit breakers in there from maybe a 20 amp or a 15 all the way up to 100. One Powerwall can typically take care of any loads that are 30 amp or less. If you have loads in your house that require more and that are on a bigger breaker, you're going to need additional Powerwalls to provide that power. And you can stack the Powerwalls. So how long will it last? And this is a very common question that we hear from people all the time. And what I want you to keep in mind as I present the info on this slide is that this is just the Powerwall alone. This doesn't take into account what the solar can do. So if we look at some of what we hear from folks as far as things they need to keep operational in their house, and obviously the router is a high ranking, especially during these current times where so many of us are working from home. The only way we could do this is with the internet. So as you can see, the router becomes a critical load that you want to back up, but it's a very, very light energy demand. And I put up some numbers here so you can see that. Basically, if we do some conversions of watt to kilowatt hours, that router is only using 0.006 kilowatt hours, but it is running 24/7. So if we tally that up and see that it's only using 0.144 kilowatt hours per day, if we wanted the Tesla Powerwall just to back up that load alone, you can see the Tesla Powerwall could back that router up for 93 days before that battery becomes exhausted. If you are just backing up a furnace fan with the Tesla Powerwall, going through some numbers just to the punch line, you can see that it's using 4.8 kilowatt hours per day. you divide that by the capacity of the power wall. You can see the power wall can basically supply energy to a furnace fan for almost 3 days. And then we throw in a refrigerator, right? So now you have Wi-Fi, now you have heat, and now you have, you're preserving your food, your basic essentials. And if you look at the average load of a refrigerator, you can see that it's using about 1.6 kilowatt hours per day. And a Tesla Powerwall alone could power that refrigerator for 8.4 days. So what happens when we combine all of these together? You can see that we're using 6.54 kilowatt hours in that day. Divided by the capacity of the battery, the Powerwall can supply your house with just these fundamental loads for 2 days. Once you add solar to the equation, basically as long as the sun comes out with any of those 2 days, you're extending the life of the battery and the cycles. What else can it do? In California, it is used a lot for offsetting time of use rates, where they have very expensive rates that occur from maybe 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. And the Powerwall can be programmed to help offset those expensive kilowatt hours. If you have solar on your roof, that solar might produce till about 6 p.m. So you don't need the Powerwall yet. But let's say at 6:30, the sun's low enough, the solar's not producing, people will go to their Powerwall to help offset those very expensive kilowatt hours. We talked about increase of self-consumption, how we can use it on a daily basis if we like. Load shifting, something you can also do, but that requires that you have either automated appliances or somebody's at home using really large loads during peak production from the solar. As Roland mentioned earlier, you can also use these batteries to shave demand hours in commercial rates, and that can be very cost effective. To drive, excuse me, to drive home what Kate was mentioning regarding resiliency and self-reliance, you heard Roland mention that there's only one line going into Penguich. So basically what this slide is representing is the vulnerability of our power grid. Basically think of the grid as major veins delivering energy to cities, towns, etc. Well, if that major vein gets disrupted, that whole town or city could be without power. And in some cases, it could be statewide. And some of the biggest threats here in Utah would be the wildfires. And naturally, we all went through that earthquake. Anybody who lives in Salt Lake, which was a real eye-opening experience for a lot of people. So this just shows the vulnerability of our grid. And solar combined with batteries, they work very well together to help us be better prepared for that kind of disruption. So how does your home become a microgrid during a power outage? So if you follow this diagram here, you've got solar on your rooftop. It's producing during the day. It's going through that inverter to convert that DC power to AC power. It then runs through what you see here is your distribution board. A lot of you will refer to this as your branch panel in your house where your circuit breakers are. You can see the battery is here in the equation. And then you can see this right here. When Roland mentioned, some of the brains of how this is operating in the background and you don't have to do anything. For the residential aspect, it's this backup gateway. This is the brain that is going to communicate between your house and the grid. So when that grid goes down, this gateway senses that, it creates an open circuit, and then it tells the rest of the components back here that the grid is down and that I now need you guys to provide power to the house on your own, and we are not going to export any of that power back onto the grid. We're going to keep it contained within the household. So here's another example of a microgrid only on a bigger scale where you have maybe a small community that is trying to be better prepared for any kind of major disruptions. And you can see solar on different facilities, but they're all going to be fed, even though they're offsetting the energy use of that building for that particular moment in time. Any surplus is going to this big battery bank that was put into place. So if this little community does experience a power outage, boom, there's going to be a gateway in there that brains that says, hey, the grid is down. We're going to keep all of the energy that we're producing and storing in this battery within that community. So we'll use the solar during the day. We'll use the energy from the battery at night. So I just want to thank you. I want to thank Utah Clean Energy and Hunt Electric for participating in this webinar and giving Creative Energies an opportunity to share with you the benefits of solar plus battery storage. And I'm going to turn it back over to Brandy as soon as I stop sharing my screen.
Brandy, you're muted.
Of course I am. I'd love to say that was the first time that's happened, but not even close. So thank you everybody for participating. I'm going to dive right into some Q&A for everybody. So I'm thinking this might be for you, Roland. One question we got is solar and storage an effective way to reduce demand charges in a commercial setting, i.e., would a battery system respond quick enough to reduce the 15-minute peaks?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the biggest benefits of energy storage to begin with, and having a battery coupled with your systems is being able to do demand response, help reduce your demand charges, take those peaks. You know, if you watch your demand load, they sort of do this all day whenever you turn large equipment on or off. A welder's a prime example. Is, you know, you turn on, you get this big spike, and then it comes back off and you're done, or it levels off. Then you spike again. And really the beautiful thing about a battery is you top the peaks and drop those peaks down in the valleys and just create that levelized load associated with it.
Got it. Another question was, maybe Kate, if you could take a first stab, and then I'm hoping Tom and Roland can chime in, is how do you think House Bill 411, which is the Renewable Energy Act passed last year or earlier this year, will impact solar investments, particularly kind of the local market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this references the Community Renewable Energy Act, which is a bill that creates a new pathway for local governments that have renewable energy goals. And so we're in the process of figuring out how to implement that. But, you know, right now, as of today, there are several local governments in Utah that have set aggressive, you know, renewable energy goals to get to 100% community renewable electricity community-wide by 2030. And, you know, the fact of it is that even if we covered every rooftop and every parking lot with solar, in most communities, there just isn't enough space on the rooftop to completely offset the entire community energy usage. And so the cities really don't have, with the cities that have those renewable energy goals, don't have a great pathway to get to that goal. But the Community Renewable Energy Act allows them to work with the utility to build projects that are designed to serve the communities as a whole specifically. So, you know, the way I look at it, what it really does is it creates this new pathway that was not there before to work with the utility to build really any kind of resource, but, you know, probably at least some large scale solar to help those communities meet their goals. So, you know, it doesn't take away any of the existing benefits or the opportunities that come from putting solar on rooftops. And, you know, so it's really going to be up to, I think, the residents and businesses in those communities and the local governments themselves to choose, you know, how much of that goal do we meet with offsite renewables and how much of it do we meet with solar on our rooftops and on our buildings. And the benefits of installing solar locally on rooftops remain. You know, you can still, installing solar on rooftops is how you're going to see those bill savings on your utility bills. Solar is going to have to be located here in the community if we want to be able to rely on it in the case of an emergency. So the way I see it, it adds a new pathway, and it's just going to be up to kind of the cities and residents in the cities to decide how to reach the goal.
So then, Tom and Roland, do you expect, how will this impact your market? How will this impact your businesses? If either one you want to quickly maybe touch on that.
Roland, would you like to go first?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, it's a niche we already play in. House Bill just supports other ways and avenues of getting renewable energy into these denser communities. And Hunt as a whole, we already are in that realm. We work in the utility of the larger scale already. It's a market for us. So either way, it doesn't prevent us from growth. It doesn't prevent us from capturing the end goal of clean energy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think for smaller scale businesses like ourselves that do commercial and residential, it might have a negative impact on our residential installation. While I agree that it's a pathway to more distributed energy on the grid, one of the things that I would always like to see is that these community solar projects, wherever that solar farm is being built, that energy actually gets used for that community. And I know that can create some challenges as far as where that grid infrastructure reaches. The other thing that sort of concerns me a little bit is that it might be, there might be a perception out there for some homeowners to say, well, why should I go solar? Why should I put solar on my roof when I can sign up for this program and not have to, invest that dollar amount out of pocket to initially get solar installed. So I am a little concerned about, while I see the benefits of adding more renewable energy onto the grid, I am a little concerned about the mom and pop solar companies here in the state of Utah.
Thank you. And I'll also note that's something that Utah Clean Energy has discussed as well. And one thing that we've heard back and think through a lot is the benefits of owning your power, of it being your system and that kind of mindset. The question I think we all knew was going to come, and this is for you, Tom, cost of a power wall now, including installation, and your expectations for the cost of a power wall a year from now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's the hard costs of not just the power wall, but you're also paying for that gateway, which is all the brains. And then we have to pay for shipping, labor, installation, and the installation is where we can see the costs vary. And the reason I mention that is ideally to keep costs down, you would like the inverter, the power wall, and that distribution panel to all be within very close proximity of each other. And sometimes that's not always the case.
And to be fair, maybe it's more of an estimation. Give us a ballpark.
To give you a ballpark, a nice clean install would be right around $13,000 for one Tesla Powerwall. But again, that does apply for the federal tax credit as long as it's tied in with the solar and being topped off by the solar. But it could run upwards to $15,000 if we're having to do long conduit runs from the battery back to a branch panel, back to an inverter.
Thank you. Okay, I want to be respectful of time. We're running out of time, so I'm just going to do one last question. But for anybody who has a question we didn't get back to, hopefully you saw the contact information earlier in the presentation, but I'll end this webinar with a slide with all of our wonderful panelists' contact information. So the last question, I'm going to start with asking you this, Kate, but then again, I'd like to open it up for Roland and Tom to give their insight. Is a question about the proposed solar changes or the rate changes for solar customers, the solar export credit proceeding. Kate, if you want to talk about briefly what Rocky Mountain Power has proposed and any updates there.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think this potential change more than anything is the change that is likely to have an impact on Utah's rooftop solar market and just the economics of whether or not it makes sense to go solar in Utah. Most people are probably aware that the payment you receive for the solar power that you export to the grid when you're not using it has changed recently. And if you install solar right now, you can receive a credit for every kilowatt hour you export to the grid of 9.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That's about the same as the retail rate that most, and this is for a residential customer, it's about the same as the retail rate for what you're paying for electricity. So it's not exactly a one-to-one trade-off, but it's pretty close. And with that export credit value, you can see a payback for solar that's somewhere in the, I don't know, maybe very roughly like 8 to 12 year range. So it still takes a long time to pay your system off, but you can expect to pay the system off sometime before the panels run out of their warranted lifetime, which is usually 20 years. And so there's a proceeding right now that could change the export credit value, which is currently 9.2 cents. Rocky Mountain Power has proposed a value that's an 85% reduction of that value. And so the short of it is it would take much longer to pay your solar installation off. In fact, with that export credit value, you probably wouldn't ever pay the installation off before the warranted lifetime of the panels. So this is something that's an open question before the Public Service Commission right now, and there'll be a proceeding to issue a final decision in early October. And I think this question of how we value rooftop solar and correctly account for the costs and the benefits of the power that's exported to the grid is really critical to making sure that we are valuing the contributions of rooftop solar customers fairly, and that we have a market for rooftop solar here in the state.
And so, Tom, I know this proceeding is pretty critical for your industry, right?
Yeah, it's very dear to our heart. I'm just going to make one small correction. Today's panel warranty is 25 years, so you get an extra 5 out of that. And Kate is right. The typical return on investment for residential can be somewhere between 8.5 and 12 years. But yeah, this 1.5 cent value that they've come up with, basically they're telling us it's based on bulk purchasing of kilowatt hours available out there on the open market. The first question I have is, well, what is the cost of getting those kilowatt hours on the open market delivered here to the loads in Utah? And you can rest assured that it won't be 1.5 cents on your bill. And as far as, so we feel that it's very undervalued of what anybody's rooftop solar is being exported back onto the grid. But if they get their way, you can pretty much, it'll be the death sentence for mom and pop solar companies in the state of Utah. And so number one, it's going to be equate to about 4,000 or more lost jobs. Number two, it's going to take away the opportunity and what I start to view as a right for a Utah citizen to own their own power. Number three, it's going to kill any path for resiliency and self-reliance. It just won't give people that incentive to invest in the solar and then couple it with battery storage so we can get to that point of greater resiliency and self-reliance.
Yeah. And I know, Roland, Hunt does a little bit of everything. You guys have many hats, but on the commercial side, this is also impacting the larger projects as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, it'll definitely have an impact. I mean, like Tom said, I think it's definitely an impact the industry as a whole. There's no doubt about it. We're sort of taking a different approach with it, and if it does pass, sort of looking at the flip side of it, what what is PacifiCorp doing, or what are they putting their customers in? And I'll bring it right back to what we started this conversation about, and what this webinar is about, is resiliency. If people want resiliency, they're going to pay for it. And because customers want resiliency for these large commercial operations, for any type of production lines, I mean, they're going to want resiliency. I mean, there's a cost associated. And as battery costs come down, renewable energy costs, I mean, building a complete off-grid system is not, in the foreseeable future, an unrealistic idea. And really, if they drive it down and Rocky doesn't, or PacifiCorp doesn't allow the people to use the net metering and utilize PacifiCorp's system, I think prices are going to get to the point here in a few years where it'll be just as effective for someone to build a whole new facility and not even utilize PacifiCorp. They wouldn't even be a customer to begin with. I think there's a detrimental effect to PacifiCorp's model with coming in so low of an offering rather than at least playing in the ball game. At the end of the day, we play in the utility realm, we play in the commercial, we do very little residential. So we have a pretty good feel of it all, but I think the bright side of this is resiliency. Like we started talking about, this is an opportunity for people to drive innovation and bring costs down, new products on the market, and just drive resiliency for everybody's individual commercial and residential properties.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Thank you so much. We are at time. So I want to thank our panelists again, Kate Bowman with Utah Clean Energy, Tom Mills with Creative Energies, and Roland Howard with Hunt Electric. And I want to thank everybody for participating in this webinar as well. I'm going to put up their contact information really quickly in case you didn't get to see it. If you have additional questions for these experts, their emails are there. And finally, Utah Clean Energy has recorded the webinar, and we will post it to our Facebook and Instagram accounts. So look out for that. And if you don't follow us already, we're at handle @Utah Clean Energy. So with that, we will end the webinar, and thank you again. Have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. We're done. Thanks, team.
Thanks. I like that last question, though.
Yeah.
There were some good questions. The anonymous attendee had some good ones. And then that last
I'll note that we're still live, Roland, just FYI. Thanks, everybody.